So I'm going to try doing something a little bit different for this tutorial. I'm going to do it on the live stream and then cut and splice pieces together. We'll see how this format works. While I'm using EmberGen here, I thought it'd be good to make a tutorial showing off how I did the muzzle flashes and kind of sync them up with the movement of the weapon. Here's the muzzle flash I got with the shotgun.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello, Byron.
Hello.
You can see we got the smoke particles kind of synced up with the movement of the barrel there. It looks like they're coming from the barrel. And the way we did that is by importing some animation from Blender and applying the muzzle flash and
Hey,
getting
excuse me. Have you seen my pet rocket?
This tutorial is
there
going to
it
have lots
goes.
of random sounds and donuts and stuff going on here. We imported
Howdy, partner.
the camera
Who
movement
might you be?
and
Well, in the South, they call me Paul. But that's just a decoy.
an emitter so we can have the barrel move around. Goodness gracious, you guys are going crazy today. So I'm going to try to replicate that whole process for the pistol. I think the first step to do is look up some reference of a black powder pistol muzzle flash.
Set trigger and make 2 or 3 shots.
It's not quite the pistol that I got. Lots of smoke. I bet you need to search for revolver. So, a boatload of smoke and some sparks and particles. I like those little, like, streaming particles falling out. That's kind of cool. We'll just start off with one of the muzzle flash things here. So, we'll go to the presets. Got a few different muzzle flashes. I'm not going to bother with any colliders. So, what we're going to do is go on over to Blender, and I'm going to append my player. So we're just going to grab that whole main collection, and then we have to go over here and do a library override and make content. That way we can actually select the skeleton and select the animations here. So we'll go over to Action Editor, and I want the revolver fire. Now I did run into an issue last time I did this where not all of the animations came through. So if that happens to you, just go back and do append, and instead of doing the collection, just go into your actions and specify the desired action. For some reason, it didn't bring all of the actions over. It just brought like half of them. So if you're missing some actions, just go grab the one you need. The reason I'm doing this in a separate Blender file is so that I don't have all the stuff we're doing for the effects cluttering up the main Blender file. And just for reference, I'm going to also link the revolver, which is actually linked from the other one. That's interesting. I guess it's playing a different action on that one. Alright, let's do library override. That should be attached to the hand here. Oh, it's still playing the pet animation. Oh, interesting. Okay. Maybe it's still attached to the original one and not the override. Okay, I'm gonna switch this to the pet animation. That way it's gonna be in sync. And I'm gonna try to take this and reparent it to a specific bone. Oh wait, no, I need to take the armature. Hang on, let's undo that. Relations, parent, game engine. So if we change it to game engine 001, maybe that. There we go. So now what we want to do is put a cylinder shape at the end of the muzzle and then a camera back here so that we can use those in EmberGen to get the effect. And I suppose I should show what the effect looks like if we don't do that first. So if we just do a muzzle flash, let's put our camera over here. I'm going to do another emitter. Volume, the shape here, and we're just going to emit some smoke on this one. So no fuel coming out of that, bit of smoke. Maybe not that much smoke. Alright, also we're going to go to the simulation and we're going to go to forces. Put a bit of buoyancy on there so the smoke actually floats up. let's put an animation on the amount of smoke that's coming out. So if we click on that, that puts it in an animation track. And we can just drop that down to 0 over time. We'll start it off at like 40. Okay, that should be good enough for demonstration purposes. Save a copy of that. Alright, now we need to make our sprite sheets. We'll do at least 32 frames. Let's do 8x4. Alright, that's not going to be quite enough for it to dissipate, but we're not going to worry about that. This is just to demonstrate things. We're going to change our size so these are square. So we're going to do a width of 1024 by 512, because this is going to be a fairly low resolution retro style thing. We're going to start at frame 2, so we have enough time for the muzzle flash to start there. So now we click on export. We need to specify the export directory, which is going to be there for me. We're just going to use the project name. So it'll be muzzle flash revolver.png and export. Oh, whoops, our camera's a little off center here. Let's fix that. I'm just doing shift middle mouse button. If I have the plus on the camera there, it's going to modify that camera. You can also deselect that if you want to just like move around the scene without moving the camera. But then if I click that, now if I move the camera, it's going to actually move this camera that's used for the rendering, and then I can click on the render tab and see what it's actually going to look like there. So re-export that, more centered. So this is what it's going to look like if we've got the muzzle flash just attached directly to the end of the weapon. So I've got some custom shaders and such built for my project Kook here. I'm focusing on the EmberGen side of things. This is not exactly what you're going to see, but I've got a material that lets me specify the number of frames, vertical and horizontal frames, and then I've got a script on here where I can set the frame rate and the number of frames. So since we've got 8x4, got 32 frames there, and then I can do a little test play. And we can see our muzzle flash and a little bit of smoke there. Now we should have this attached to the end of that. We can do a little test play and see we've got a muzzle flash. Looks fine for the weapon being stationary, but when we look at it in game, oh no, you're gonna see the way it looks with a little little motion. The muzzle flash is too large. The smoke is too subtle. So I think we're gonna need to make some tweaks here to even illustrate the issues that I was trying to show off. Let's drop down the burst size. Let's change the radius of this thing a little bit. Oh, I see. The flame dissipation is actually animated. Alright, we're just going to do a solid. Crank that up. Huh, even if it's 100%. Oh, maybe the particles. Hang on, let's put that down and then change our particle life. So we're going to do like 1/60th. To 1/30th. Okay.
I just turned around to see you following me.
Jordy, thank you for the follow. We're gonna crank up the smoke dissipation because we're gonna need that later, and I'm just gonna crank up the amount of smoke that comes out of here. Try to get this more of an angle where it makes sense from the perspective we're going to be seeing it. And re-export. Okay, now we can see it a little bit better. See how the smoke is just attached to the muzzle of the gun? And it looks a little goofy. So in this case, I animated the muzzle, the emitter, and the camera all manually with keyframes here in EmberGen, which is definitely a possibility. But it was kind of a pain because we'd have to go through and then find, like, okay, you know, at frame 9, that's when it's kind of at the peak height, and then we'd just sort of adjust the position of the primitive shape at that frame. Also, it'd be a little bit off because I was doing a frame stride of 2, So we basically have to double that. So we have to do it frame 18. And then I also had a delay on the start because the muzzle flash kicks in a little bit late. So we'd have to add in a couple frames. So it'd be like, okay, so frame 9 is actually frame 20 over here. And, getting it all lined up perfectly. It was always close, but never 100%. But Rabbit pointed out that there's actually an import node that we can use here. And we can import FBX. They recommend using FBX, but there's also Limbic files. I don't think the OBJ supports animation, but you can use that as an emitter. So after much struggling, we figured out how to make that work. And that's what we have on wait. Wait a second. Okay, that was weird. I thought the thing got broken. That scared me for a second. I don't know what happened there. Anyway, so we use the imports, and I have two different animations. One is driving the camera, which drives the camera position, and then one that is driving the shape for the volume. So we're going to need two things here. We're going to need some sort of shape that will emit the effects from, and then we'll need a camera. So we'll just add a mesh, the cylinder. Don't really need that many sides. We'll go tab to edit mode, scale this down, make it a bit longer. All right, so that's going to be our muzzle emitter. So now we're going to take this, not that, this, and I'm going to move it to new collection. We'll call this I'll call it just EmberGen stuff. Call that emitter, and then we're going to take that, and I'm going to parent to that object. Then we're going to move it to the end of the barrel, like so. Then we're going to add a camera. Do Alt-R to remove all the rotation on it, RX90. And I'm going to parent, select that, Control P, parent to that object. So basically the camera is going to follow whatever the effects does. And you know what, this time I'm going to try making it from kind of the player's perspective. Last time I did it right behind it, but I think if we put it here and then we kind of aim it there, it's going to give us a more natural perspective of like what this muzzle flash would look like from the viewer's perspective, if that makes sense. If anybody's curious what I did there, I selected the camera and then hit numpad 0 to go into the camera view, and then I can use RZ to rotate on the Z-axis to kind of line that up. Wallaber! Yo, thank you for the raid. How's it going? What were we up to today? Glad things are coming along for you. So now what we need to do is export an FBX file and get animation on here. And in order for these to animate in the FBX, we are going to need some keyframes. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do a new action. We'll call this emitter and check that fake user so that that does not get lost. Always make sure you check that magic shield button, because if you don't have that stored in a track or something somewhere, Blender might just delete it because it thinks it's unreferenced. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to insert a keyframe with the I key. And then do another keyframe there. We'll do the same thing for this. Insert a keyframe there. And another at 30. So that just makes the FBX exporter know that there are animations associated with these objects. And then we will export to FBX. Now we're just going to test the FBX by re-importing it into Blender and making sure that things went correctly. So we're going to import FBX. Oh, whoops. I exported way too much. That's 13 megabyte FBX file. No, I forgot. We need to hide this other collection. Oops. First of all, move that to our EmberGen stuff collection. And then we'll hide this collection. And then we will export this again, but we're going to limit it to visible objects because we only need these for EmberGen. We don't need all the other stuff. That's just there for reference and for tracking the animation. Now it's 52K. That's much more reasonable. Although it does look like we are on a bit of a strange axis. I think it's because, I don't know why this happened with this and not my other project. I think the reason this is happening is because this character, this base mesh that I started with originally, was on Y up axis. So I had to rotate it 90 degrees. And it seems like that translation did not make it over here. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like we're from this perspective, Y up. But we can rotate this and stuff in EmberGen. We're gonna have to scale it up and do some translation anyway. So another rotation there is not a big deal. So now we want to use this new shape as our emitter. So we're gonna right click down here, go to import, go to the revolver fire position reference. Under animate, we're gonna pick the emitter action. We're gonna take this geometry and put that into shape, and we'll double click on the other thing to remove the old one. It's in the middle, it's very small, so the simulation is a much larger scale, but we can see that it's emitting something down there. Actually, what I'm going to do is take, was this the original one? Or was it that one? I think it was that one. I'm going to put it in this emitter, and then on this one there's a visuals option, and we can do show emitter, so we can see there's where the original one is. Basically, we want to align the new one that I made up with that. We're going to take our import, we're going to go to the transform, and we're going to scale that up. You may need to scale it up as big as even like 2,000 or 3,000 depending on how large this volume is. And what's interesting is that this import seems to be oriented correctly, so I guess we don't have to do that rotation. We can just scoot it over here. Trying to line it up in a similar place so all of the optimizations for this area line up, although it is going to recoil up quite a bit, so we may actually need to move it down. Now, I had this issue before where because the recoil is kicking it up so much, the muzzle flash actually, like, I think is inheriting that velocity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the original shape for the muzzle flash particle emitter, because that is going to be like pretty much instantaneous. You're going to get like 1 or 2 frames of muzzle flash, and then we'll have the smoke follow the barrel of the gun. So we're going to reposition this so that it's kind of lined up with that. Oh, another thing I forgot is that we need to set the frame rate up to match. So my original character frame rate was 60 FPS, so we're going to click on this little printer icon thing here, the output tab. I'm going to switch that to 60. Save and export the FBX file again. And since in our render we are doing a frame stride of 2, since the simulation is like larger, we basically want to simulate it faster. So we're skipping every other frame and we're skipping the first 2 frames. So we need to make some adjustments here in the import thing. In playback, what we want to do is set, well, first of all, we need to re-import. Oh shoot. I forgot to hide everything else. That re-import's like, oh my gosh, what is all this stuff? Let's export just the necessary stuff. Okay, so now we get the muzzle flash kind of stationary, and then that recoils up, and we can turn off the show emitter here. Before we render it, we want to turn off the actual asset visibility here, so we can uncheck that render all there. Now that's hidden and it's just going to emit smoke. So like I said, we need to adjust the frame rate here because it's saying our original FPS is 60, but we basically want it to go twice as slow because we're skipping every other frame. So we're going to check override FPS and we're going to set that to 30. Now if you made the simulation more to scale, you might not need to do this, but I found EmberGen seems to look better when you do stuff at a large scale, even if it's for small effects, because it just makes them look more grand. So we're going to take this camera thing from the import, since we're using the camera action, and we're going to drag that over to that camera control. And that's going to drive the camera to follow what our camera is doing here. There we go. Now you can see how the camera is panning up and the smoke is going kind of below the barrel because of the recoil. I'm going to adjust the field of view a little bit. if I can. Actually, I don't know if I can because it may be driven by the Blender one. Yeah, I think that's locked out because we're driving it by that control. We'll have to adjust that in the Blender file. This is where you get to the area of just like hours of tweaking and stuff because we don't want it necessarily going off the bottom. That may not be visible because it may be covered up by the weapon in the hand, so it may not be a problem. The clipping off the top is probably going to be noticeable though. Okay, we are out of sync here. Not sure if that's just a matter of the scale of the mesh. Try making that smaller and see if it looks better. Yeah, it's almost like we got too much counter rotation. I think it might be we need a little more delay. Actually, that may be something on my end. Yeah. Okay, that matches a little closer. You see the muzzle flash, then the barrel climbs up, and then the smoke kind of counters that. So the alignment looks a little bit off. But you can see what we're going for. That may be close enough. Actually, I think it might just be because of the lower frame rate, because we're playing this in slow-mo, so it's going to have a few frames where it's attached, and then it's going to play the next frame, and then it's going to have a few frames where it's attached, and then it's going to play the next frame. We have time scale 1. That may just be fine. Now we just have to deal with the smoke not dissipating before we finish the animation here. But I think rather than make it dissipate sooner, what I want to do is extend the number of frames. So we'll do 8x8, 1024 by 1024, re-export. And we don't want that to loop. So you notice how it played that recoil animation twice. So on playback, we're going to uncheck loop animation and export. And now it has time to dissipate, and we may actually extend the emitter there. If we're going to have it run for this many frames, might as well have it smoke for that many frames. Trying to get it synced up so that when we get to the end here, we've basically dissipated all the smoke, which I think is pretty good there. So we're going to re-export. We do have to worry about that. Now that we're putting out more smoke, it's going to clip off the top, so we're going to have to make that sprite bigger or put some forces on the top to prohibit that from going up there. Lots of little fine-tuning things we can do. So we need to go over here and adjust these. Whoops, not 80 frames. 8. Oops, that's not right. Fun bug with Godot. If you have something set as a local to scene, which I'm going to turn off because we're only going to have this one muzzle flash. But for things like explosions and stuff, we need to set this to local to scene so it makes a new instance of the material. When I bring this over in here, it makes a new instance of the material in the editor as well instead of referencing that original one. So if we go look at this surface material, we'll notice that this is like a copy of that shader material, not the original one. So I have to press that revert button to get it fixed. I have entered in a bug on that, so hopefully it'll get addressed at some point, but that is something to be aware of. Okay, so now we can see very clearly that that smoke is dissipating off of the top there, which looks a little weird. So what we're gonna do is increase the field of view on this camera here. Use field of view, bump that up to, I don't know, something larger. Save, export, FBX, go back over to EmberGen, and re-import that, re-export that. Now we've got a little more room there, and with that, we can maybe do some forces or something to stop the smoke from getting up that high. So a few things, I feel like our muzzle flash is kind of weak now. It's just a few pixels here. So, we're gonna up our particle emission, for one thing. We need to work on making the smoke not go off the top. So we could cut down on the buoyancy. That might help. Force. Let's see what that looks like from the render perspective. Oh, it's close. It's like right there. we could add a force, like a point force. It has some repel strength to it. And put that like there. The linear fall off. Need stronger strength. Alright, see if that is enough to stop it from going off the top. Yeah. There we go. It just kind of goes up a little bit. Maybe I'll tweak that just a little more. Bump it up some. There we go. Now it's kind of like right up at the top, but not going above the top. I think I want to scale the mesh up again. Muzzle flash still is looking a little weak. Actually, I might not want to delay this. I think I see why I had the delay on there because of the hammer coming down, but we may just delay the muzzle flash and have the bullet come out immediately. Okay. So now the flash is more synced up with when the hammer hits a little bit. That's like the basics of getting the recoil and stuff synced up. Now we can do some stuff to kind of fine-tune the visuals of the muzzle flash and the smoke and such. One thing you may have noticed is that since we have an emitter that is just a straight-up cylinder here, it looks a little unnatural. So what we can do is instead of going directly to the shapes there, we can put a shape blend and set that to an intersection. Double-click to remove that. Run that node there, and then we'll add a noise node and scale that up a little bit. And now, instead of just being a straight up cylinder, we've got this noise pattern here kind of overlapping that to make it look a little more natural. Another thing we can do is we can increase the voxel density. So if we go to the domain and click on upscaling and then do like a 2x upscale, apply that. Now we've got a little more detail and wispiness in the smoke. Even though it's low res, I think that's going to come through. We can also do some little particle emitters, or some additional particle emitters. In the reference video we looked at earlier, there were some little sparks flying out that had smoke trailing off of them, which looked kind of cool. So we're going to try doing much fewer particles. We'll just have like a few of them, but give them like a little life period. So we got those little embers flying out there, which are kind of cool. Alright, what if I set the gravity multiplier to 100? Ah, now they're falling. And then landing on the bottom. Actually, I think I need to make the life on those a little bit smaller. Life, and we'll bump that down to like a few milliseconds. Ah, smoke. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. It all happens so fast it's kind of hard to see. Like you can see the little arcs from them, but it's almost like they need to be slowed down. Alright, I'm gonna reduce the gravity multiplier. I guess reduce that. Alright, well, I think we've successfully made a muzzle flash that syncs up pretty well with the movement of the weapon here. You can also completely skip animating the camera in EmberGen and use a sprite that's fixed to the player aim direction instead of the weapon. I think this actually looks better, but of course I didn't try it until I recorded and edited footage from my prior method. I prefer more concise tutorials, but due to limited time I had to create the tutorial as I was making production assets. Hopefully it was still helpful, and if you're curious about the game, it's called Kook. It's a quake-like retro FPS, and if that seems like your kind of thing, adding it to your wishlist would be much appreciated. Let me know what you think of this tutorial format in the comments. Also, a big thanks to my patrons for giving me extra runway, not only to work on my game projects, but also tutorials and other videos like this. I really appreciate the support. Also, I don't like locking things behind a paywall, so I have a public post with a looping fire effect I made in EmberGen if you want to just go grab that.